Well, good evening and salam alaikum. We gather tonight to take part in one of the most cherished traditions of Ramadan, the coming together of family, friends and community at the end of the day's fast. I'd like to begin by echoing the earlier acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the lands in which we meet tonight and extend my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Gatherings like this remind us that even in uncertain and challenging times, people can still choose to come together in goodwill. In that spirit, I would like to warmly acknowledge our co-hosts for tonight, Ms Nina Taylor, MP, the Parliamentary Secretary for Education, Mr Nick McGowan, MLC, the Shadow Minister for Environment and Shadow Minister for Fire Rescue Victoria, and Mr Amit Keskin, the Executive Director of the Australian Intercultural Society. Thank you for bringing us all together this evening, and thank you for the leadership that you and all of the other parliamentarians in the room show each and every day in strengthening harmony across Victoria and across our nation. You may be relieved to hear that I'm intending to rely on all of the other earlier acknowledgements of dignitaries that were given and won't be repeating them. But I did want to make two other acknowledgements in the room, primarily because they're former and current colleagues of mine. I would like to acknowledge Mr Chin Tan, our former Race Discrimination Commissioner, and Commissioner Deb Sabaris, our new National Children's Commissioner, and to deeply thank both of them for, firstly, the privilege of working with them, but secondly, for their lifelong commitment to strengthening human rights for all of us here in Australia. There is something really deeply meaningful about coming together on a night like this. Across cultures and faith traditions, the act of sharing food has always carried symbolism. But during Ramadan, it carries something even deeper. The breaking of the fast is a moment of reflection, a moment of humility, a moment of gratitude. It's a time when we can pause, reconnect with our values, and remember the importance of compassion, generosity, and care for others. And to that end, iftar dinners such as this also represent something much more important about our national life at the moment. When I was asked initially to give these remarks, I was asked to speak to the theme of human rights and freedoms in public and workspace, and I will touch on that in my remarks. But I actually wanted to ground my remarks this evening in the current context, because it's something that's weighing heavily on my heart, and I'm sure that for many of you it weighs heavily on yours. And in that spirit, nights like tonight are so critical, because when I look around the room I see people from different backgrounds, different faiths, different political traditions, all coming together, sharing a table, listening, learning and recognising our shared humanity. And in a world that feels so divided, particularly at the moment, that simple act matters more than we realise. It's particularly important at the moment because, as I'm sure we are all acutely aware, we're not meeting tonight in easy times. Around the world, conflict and violence are inflicting terrible human suffering. Lives are being lost, families are being torn apart, communities are grieving. And although we're meeting tonight at the Victorian Parliamentarians Iftar dinner, tonight is not a political evening. Instead, it's a human one. Tonight is not about debating global politics or taking sides in conflicts that are far away. But instead, I want to acknowledge something that transcends politics, and that's the human cost of violence and division. Across Australia tonight, we know that so many families are watching events overseas with deep, profound concern for their loved ones far away. They carry that quiet anxiety of not knowing whether their relatives are safe, whether their homes are standing, whether peace will come. And these fears are shaping the emotional landscape of so much of our community here in Australia at the moment. Ramadan invites us to pause in these troubling times, to reflect and to hold those who are suffering in our hearts. Because the conflicts that we see around the world are never entirely distant. They're felt right here in Australia in the concern that people carry for their loved ones overseas, but also in the way that global tensions ripple through our own communities. And that makes this moment in time particularly important for our country as well. Australia has long been shaped by people arriving from many parts of the world, from all over the world, seeking safety, seeking opportunity, seeking a better life for their family. And over many generations, we've learnt, often imperfectly, how to live together as a shared national community. But that harmony can never be taken for granted. In recent years, here in Australia, we've seen a worrying rise in racism and hatred directed at so many communities. At times, those moments can be small, expressed through throwaway words, online abuse, acts of vandalism, acts that we might be tempted to simply ignore or dismiss as isolated moments in the hope that they might just fade away. But sometimes those things erupt in ways that shock the conscience of the nation. The tragic anti-Semitic terrorist attack at Bondi Beach last year was one such moment. But that attack didn't occur in isolation. It unfolded in a climate where we've allowed division and hostility to already start intensifying. Immediately following the Bondi Beach attack, I said that failing to confront hatred head-on would risk normalising it in ways that will haunt future generations. Sadly, the past few months have continued to show how real that risk is. We've recently seen more troubling incidents targeting Muslim, Jewish and First Nations communities. These include an alleged planned mass casualty attack against mosques, police and parliament in WA, a bomb attack targeting First Nations people at the Invasion Day protests in Perth, an alleged anti-Semitic attack here in Victoria on a Jewish student at a Victorian Scouts event, and further attacks on places of worship, including a Brisbane synagogue being ram-raided, and vandalism, serious vandalism of a Perth mosque immediately following the revelations of that planned mass casualty terrorist attack. These events are a stark reminder that hatred doesn't appear out of nowhere. Words shape the climate that we live in. And when the climate of a society changes, actions follow. When hatred becomes normalised, it becomes easier for people to justify cruelty, intimidation and violence. And that's something none of us should allow. The safety and dignity of every single person in Australia, of every community in Australia, must be non-negotiable. When anti-Semitism rises, we must all stand with Jewish Australians. When Islamophobia rises, we must all stand with Muslim Australians. Because when racism appears in any form, it has to be confronted clearly, consistently, and with principle. Because once we allow hatred to take root against one group, it inevitably spreads. Moments like this test the strength of a nation's social fabric. But they also reveal something deeper. They reveal the values that we choose to defend. And that brings me to another challenge that faces our country that's less visible, but equally significant and directly linked to that rise in hatred and division. Across many democracies, including our own, trust in democratic institutions is showing real signs of strain. Recent polling by ANU has revealed something that should concern us all and give us pause for thought at a Victorian Parliamentarians Iftar dinner. And that is a growing number of young Australians are expressing doubts about whether democracy is working for them. Less than half of 18 to 24-year-olds who were polled believe that democracy is always preferable to other forms of government. For a country like ours, a country built on democratic participation, that's a warning sign that we cannot afford to ignore. Democracy can't survive on habit alone. Each generation must believe it. Each generation must see that it delivers for them fairness, opportunity and dignity. If young people feel disconnected from democracy, then our job is not to dismiss those concerns. Our job is to strengthen the institutions and the practices that make democracy meaningful. Democracy has to be something that people experience, not just something they inherit. And it starts with how we treat one another, in how we listen to different voices, and how we ensure that every single Australian feels as though they have a stake in the future of our country. These challenges are real, but they're not the whole story. Because when I look around the room tonight, I'm reminded that events like this bring with them profound hope. Again, I see people from different faiths, different backgrounds, different cultures, sharing tables and listening to one another. That matters. Because human rights don't live in abstract documents alone. They live in the choices that each and every one of us make each and every day. Human rights begin, as Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, in small places close to home. They begin in the everyday moments where people decide how they'll treat each other, whether with suspicion or with respect, whether with hostility or with kindness. Gatherings like these are one of those small places close to home that Eleanor Roosevelt was referring to. And the responsibility to create these places doesn't lie with governments alone, although they have a very important role to play. It doesn't arise through laws and policies alone, although again, law has a very important role to play. But ultimately, this responsibility sits with each and every one of us in the words that we choose, in the conversations we have, in the way we treat one another, and in the way that we respond when prejudice and division appears in front of us. Nights like tonight remind me that our path is one we can choose and we can shape. So let's all consciously choose tonight to walk a path that is grounded not in fear, but in empathy. Not in division, but in shared humanity. And tonight, as the fast is broken and food is shared, we can find hope in the power of simple hospitality. A simple act that carries a really profound message. You belong here with me. You're welcome here with me. You're part of this community with me. So as we gather in the State Library of Victoria to break the fast together, let's carry that spirit forward. remembering that a peaceful society isn't something that we inherit. It's something we have to choose to build together every single day. Ramadan reminds us that renewal is always possible. Renewal of faith, renewal of compassion, and renewal of our commitment to justice and to peace. So in that vein, I would again like to thank our co-hosts for bringing us together this evening for such an important gathering. But even more importantly than that, I'd like to thank each and every one of you in the room here tonight for the work that you do every day and for choosing a path, even in what are incredibly challenging times, to come together, to share a table, and to renew our common humanity. Ramadan Mubarak, and may the spirit of this month guide us long after tonight's fast is broken. Thank you.